Great. All right. Well, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here and for joining us today. I'm excited to spend my lunch hour here with you all. My name is Erica Collins. I am a health educator here at Providence Community Wellness. I teach a wide variety of different health and wellness classes here in our office. And joining me is my colleague, Caitlin Snyder. Caitlin, if you mind just doing a quick introduction for yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin. I'm a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes care and education specialist. And here at Community Wellness, I spend most of my time doing diabetes education and working with folks who are living with diabetes. So I'm pretty passionate about this topic. I'm excited for this discussion.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, we are both very excited to have this conversation with you all. And then Caitlin is here to answer any questions that you all have at the end for either myself or Caitlin. So please feel free to put any and all questions that you have in the chat or in the QA option. There should be a feature there to put in any questions that you have for myself and for Caitlin. We've set some time aside at the end to be able to answer those questions. Otherwise, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Starting off with just some objectives for our hour spent together here today. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to define stigma and what even is it? Why are we here to talk about it? It should be able to identify the different types and causes of stigma. We'll talk about and learn about the impact of diabetes and weight stigma, learn about the consequences that it has on our health, both physically and mentally. And we're going to talk about some misconceptions. Hopefully, we should be able to challenge some of those misconceptions that we'll be talking about today, too. Now, diabetes stigma and weight stigma are two different things, and I will do my best to talk about them separately, but there is some intersection and some overlap between the two. And I'll be talking a little bit later about myths and strategies to reduce stigma where I kind of mesh the two together. So we will talk about them a little bit separately, but then also combined as well. First of all, what even is it? What is stigma? What is bias? Why are we even here to talk about these things? Starting off here with weight bias. So weight bias is the negative ideologies that are associated with obesity. This is typically caused by this general belief that stigma and shame will motivate people to lose weight, or this idea that people fail to lose weight as a result of inadequate self-discipline or insufficient willpower. TGI is very prevalent across the states here. And then weight stigma is the discriminatory acts and ideologies targeted towards individuals because of their weight and size. So this result from that weight bias. The drivers of stigma typically are based around this misunderstanding of the complex causes of obesity, with people attributing weight gain to personal responsibility without really failing to grasp the complex other factors of genetics and environment and biological factors that drive it too. And we'll talk about some of these later in the presentation as well. And we've also got on here diabetes bias. So that's the negative ideologies and misconceptions associated with diabetes. And then diabetes stigma, including the experiences or exclusion, rejection, any kind of prejudice and blame that people living with diabetes encounter often every day and in their everyday life. Weight discrimination, especially, is reported by Americans at comparable rates of racial discriminations, inequities exist because of this in employment settings, educational institutions, healthcare, society, media. All these things play a role in this that we're going to talk all about today. And then I also want to mention here too that while weight bias and diabetes bias can intersect and there can be some overlap here, it's important to recognize that not all individuals with diabetes are considered to be overweight, and not all individuals who are living in larger bodies also have diabetes. So there is still this difference between the two. So I'm sure we are all here because we recognize that weight stigma and diabetes stigma is prevalent in our society and exists, but just in case you're not convinced, I pulled this study here that I found. This is a qualitative study where they interviewed second-year medical students at a large medical school in the Midwest, and they asked them their feelings about people living with diabetes, and then they had them attend a patient panel of people living with diabetes and then asked if that changed their feeling after the fact. So these are some direct quotes that we pulled from this study that medical students specifically said. So one student said, "I do judge the people that develop diabetes later in life because of poor lifestyle and eating habits. I see this as a lack of concern for their own well-being." I have another student that quoted, for individuals with type 2 diabetes who, for a variety of reasons, fail to manage or prevent their condition, yes, I see them as weak-willed and lazy. And then finally, another third student quoted, I have a small stigma against people with type 2 diabetes because I usually think it is self-inflicted. So this is prevalent. This exists in our healthcare system, outside of our healthcare system. This is all the more common. And it's hard to say these comments, but they exist. So this is why we're here to talk about them. So let's talk about some types and causes specifically for our weight stigma. There's a wide variety. This is definitely not an exhaustive list, but just the main ones here. First of all, just being blame and judgment. People are often blamed or judged about their weight just by assuming that it's solely a response or result of poor lifestyle choices or lack of self-control. There are also a lot of misconceptions about weight loss and the belief that people who are in larger bodies are just not trying hard enough to lose weight, right? When there are so many other factors stacked against them. I know Caitlin and I have both seen that, people are trying so hard. It's not just, oh, they need to try harder to be successful. And that's comes from this place of blame and judgment. Also, stereotyping. Individuals tend to be stereotyped as lazy, unhealthy. It leads to assumption about their abilities, their character, their appearance, just because of how much they weigh. It can also lead to internalized stigma, right? Individuals might internalize the societal stigma that exists and internalize that, which can lead to feelings of shame, of guilt, low self-esteem. It can impact our mental health, our overall well-being, our self-care, right? When we internalize all those stigmas that we're experiencing. It's also a large focus here in societal focus on individual responsibility. The drivers of stigma are primarily based around this misunderstanding of the complex causes of weight. And there's a common belief that lifestyle choices like diet and exercise are the sole things that impact our weight, which can lead, again, to that blame and judgment as well towards individuals, thinking that they've brought this condition all upon themselves and it's all their fault. But it is important to grasp that there are also genetic factors, environmental, trauma, unhealthy relationships with food, medical diagnoses, medications. There's a whole wide variety of other things that are playing a role here. And then finally, media portrayal. Media portrayal is huge. Media often presents a very oversimplified or a very negative portrayal of weight, which can really reinforce those stereotypes and misconceptions that already exist in our society, which can perpetuate that stigma, contribute to this lack of understanding. A common form even of cyberbullying is body shaming as well. It's very, very prevalent here. Specifically for even like movies or TV shows, characters that are in larger bodies are often shown overindulging in junk food. They're less likely to be involved in romantic relationships. So I have an example here. This is from the show Friends. For those of you who have not seen Friends, it's an older TV show that has, 6 main characters, and it just travels through the life of these 6 characters, and one of them is Monica. So Monica on the show Friends is a perfect example of this. When she is portrayed as, quote unquote, thinner in this picture here in the bottom left-hand corner, she is portrayed as attractive and lovable, and she's dating and she's got a great job, and it's, this wonderful person. And then in a couple episodes, they go back to flashbacks of what she was like when she was younger, and they put her in a larger body suit. So when she's dressed up in this larger body suit, she's portrayed as less than, she's not able to stop eating, she's not dating anyone. They call her a vacuum, and she just eats up all the food and just portrays her as a completely different person. So this is one episode they say, well, some girl ain't Monica. And they show this picture and she says, well, the camera adds 10 pounds. And they make a joke out of her, well, how many cameras are actually on you, right? So it's just, a prime example here of how this exists in our TV shows and our movies, things like that. Now, as we flip the script here to diabetes stigma, some are the same and some will overlap here. I'm going to play this in a second. Again, it's blame and judgment. So people living with diabetes tend to be blamed or judged for their conditions. Others assume that their Diabetes is a result of poor lifestyle choices, lack of self-control. It's very, very common. Lots of stereotyping that exists with people living with diabetes. Individuals tend to be stereotyped as lazy or overweight or unhealthy. It can lead to assumptions about, again, their character or their appearance. Also could be fear and avoidance. So some people might fear individuals. There are still beliefs out there that exist about the contagiousness or even the severity of the condition, which can result in social exclusion, isolation, discrimination. But it can also even be fear of the unknown, not knowing enough about the condition, making assumptions about diabetes that aren't necessarily accurate. Diabetes is a chronic condition that requires ongoing management, and some individuals also might just fear what they don't understand. So this fear can lead to avoidance or discrimination towards people who are living with diabetes. Same as the other one, it can also lead to a lot of internalized stigma. Individuals living with diabetes might internalize that societal stigma, leading to those feelings of shame and guilt and low self-esteem, which can impact your overall well-being, both your physical and your mental health and your management of your condition that you've been diagnosed with as well. There also is this lack of public awareness and understanding. There's a whole lot of widespread misconceptions and lack of knowledge about the condition of diabetes, which contribute to a lot of stigma as well, especially for different types, right? Many people are unaware of the different types of diabetes, how it's managed, or the factors that contribute to its development even, which can lead to a lot of negative attitudes and associations with them as well. There also is a lot of societal focus on that individual responsibility, that common belief that diet and exercise are the only things responsible for developing diabetes. It very often will lead to judgment and just believing that people have brought this upon themselves and it's all their faults. But it's important to note that there are other genetic factors and other factors that can contribute to the development of diabetes as well. And then again, media portrayal. This is so prevalent here in our society. Media so often presents a very oversimplified or very negative portrayal of people living with diabetes, which can reinforce that stigma that already exists. So in this example that I've got here, this is from a TV show, The Big Bang Theory, and this one combines kind of both diabetes and weight stigma here as well. So I'm going to just play a short clip of this and then
you feel your previous job experience has prepared you for a career like this?
Well, as a waitress, sales was a big part of my job. I mean, believe me, I convinced a lot of very large customers who should not be eating cheesecake to have more cheesecake. One of those chubsters even had an insulin pump.
I have an insulin pump.
So she, is making a joke about people who are in large bodies at this cheesecake factory. She even calls them chubsters and is inaccurately talking about diabetes. Just not a great example, and just contributes to this stigma that exists around both weight and diabetes as well. So how does this affect our health, specifically our physical and our mental health? When we think about the weight stigma that exists in our society, there's a lot of different ways that it can affect both our physical and our mental health. Many studies have demonstrated that weight stigma is associated with a lot of unhealthy relationships with food, whether that be eating in secret, loss of control during eating, or restrictive eating. Individuals might turn to food as a coping mechanism to deal with the stress and anxiety that's caused by that weight stigma, which can contribute to even more weight gain. Or it could even be weight loss in a very unhealthy way if you're not eating at all or you're not eating enough, so you start to lose some weight, but it's not in the healthiest way. Can also create a barrier to engaging in physical activity for fear of judgment or discrimination because of their size when they go out to be active, or lower motivation to exercise because of the stress that the stigma is causing. This, constant exposure to these negative stereotypes and discrimination can erode our self-worth and contribute to feelings of depression, anxiety, isolation, can lead to feelings of shame, inadequacy, worthlessness, all just stemming here from this weight stigma. It can hinder our personal and professional growth, our relationships, our overall well-being, can even distort an individual's perception on even your own body, which can lead to, a negative body image as well. Specifically for diabetes stigma, there is some overlap here, but also some differences as well. But it absolutely affects our physical and our mental health. So to avoid some of that social discrimination, some people living with diabetes might take measures to conceal their disease when they're out in public, such as delaying or missing their insulin injection, and maybe not monitoring their blood glucose in places other than at home. Maybe they don't want to check their numbers anywhere else where people are around. Might be feeling self-conscious about drawing attention to their condition or worried about being judged by others, potentially refusing to participate in social activities like eating with your friends or family or your community, whoever that looks like that you dine with. Can also lead to avoidance of physical activity, again, for fear of being judged or even potentially concerns about possible hypoglycemic episodes, which again, absolutely plays a role in our mental health, can lead to feelings of depression, anxiety, and negative self-image as well. There absolutely are both physical and mental adverse consequences. But even beyond that, I want to talk about how this affects our health in a broader healthcare setting. Now, this study that I pulled here from clumped both weight and diabetes together. So this one, I'm kind of meshing the two together, but a lot of evidence from this study suggests that providers spend less time in appointments for people who are of larger sizes, provide less education about their health. They're more reluctant to perform certain screenings for individuals who are affected by obesity. Patients are very often labeled as less adherent to medications. I don't love that word, which we'll talk about, but they're seen as less adherent, lacking self-control. They're seen as unmotivated. Talk about like patient-centered communication. The study showed that providers who encountered patients in larger bodies had less rapport, less relationship building talk, and this less patient-centered care then leads to less patient-provider trust, worse patient outcomes. Patients were less likely to go to their regular exams or yearly checkups. They're less likely to get screened for various illnesses, more likely to delay getting an appointment, following up with their provider. A lot of things that just stem right from the stigma that lead to a lot of confounding events. There are also consequences of weight bias that can lead to missed diagnoses because people are dismissed as needing to simply lose weight rather than actually being taken seriously or treated appropriately for the condition that they might potentially have. I know Caitlin has mentioned, stories of cancer diagnoses that have been missed because people are told they just need to lose weight and they'll be fine. So different, diagnoses or tests that get missed because of someone's size. And this can even go beyond our health, but even in the workplace, employees who experience weight bias in the workplace are less likely to get hired after an in-person interview, more likely to be given a lower wage or salary. They're even less likely to be given a promotion. It has so many effects. I think this image here does a really good example of a visual of what this looks like. So on your screen here, you should see stemming here from our weight stigma can lead to lots of feelings of stress. Now, this can be an immediate stress response, which can lower our cognitive capacity, impair communication, ability to retain new information, but it can also have long-term effects of stress on our health as well. So we talked about some of these eating and physical activity behaviors, potentially increasing our calorie consumption, disordered eating, lower motivation to exercise, but it can also have physiological reactions to our body, increased levels of cortisol. It can raise our A1C or blood pressure. The stigma, like I talked about, affects our healthcare services, poor treatment and seen as poor treatment adherence, less trust of providers, less follow-up care, poor communication between patient and provider. And then that ultimately can lead to, again, those mental health components, depression, anxiety, our poor body image, maybe substance use, or not able to manage our condition quite as well. Lower quality of life, right? I think this is such a nice visual of how just stemming from just some stigma, how it can have so many different effects mentally and physically all throughout our body. Now, this study I find oh so interesting. This study looked at the impact of weight stigma on calorie consumption. Now, this is just one small study, and more definitely need to be done. But this wording on the slide here was pulled directly from this study, where they recruited 74 women, some in larger body sizes, some not in larger body sizes, and they were put into 4 different groups. The first group was women in larger bodies who viewed a stigmatizing video. The stigmatizing video consisted of brief clips from popular television and movies that depicted larger women. There were specifically videos that evoked negative weight bias stereotypes. They were seen as clumsy or loud or lazy, teasing in the workplace, lots of, very stigmatizing, very weight-focused videos. The second group was women in larger bodies who viewed the neutral video. This neutral or the control video consisted of a series of clips that were just showed neutral scenes, like an insurance commercial or something that didn't have to do with their weight. And then they had other women who were not considered to be overweight who viewed both the stigmatizing and the neutral video as well. So what they did is they took some basic vitals, they did blood pressure, did some basic information for these women, then had them watch this video, either the stigmatizing or the neutral video, and then did some follow-up questionnaires after they watched this. And while they were filling out the questionnaires, they were provided lots of different food, different calorie-dense snack foods, which they were invited to consume freely after watching these videos. Now, granted, this is just one study, and definitely more needs to be done on this, but this study showed that the women in the larger bodies who watched the stigmatizing video, this one here on the left-hand side, consumed over 3 times the calories of the larger size women who didn't watch it, who watched the neutral video. I thought that was so interesting, just to see how even watching a stigmatizing video can even affect your calorie consumption. Right. So let's talk about some misconceptions and whether we think these are a myth or fact. I want to get you all involved here for the first one. So I'm going to pull this up here. What do we all think? Is this a myth or a fact? Only people who are overweight are at risk for type 2 diabetes. Let's throw your thoughts in the chat. Do we think this is a myth or a fact? Nice. We got some myths in the chat. Perfect. I will give you a fun sneak peek. They're all myths. That's all we're going to talk about today. But yes, this absolutely is a myth. While a higher body weight can be a risk factor for type 2 diabetes, people of any size can be diagnosed with diabetes. It's important to discuss your risk with your healthcare providers, get regular screenings. There's even a pre-diabetes risk test that you can take online as well. But it's important to recognize that anyone at any size can develop type 2 diabetes. Next one on here, also a myth. People who get type 2 diabetes did it to themselves with poor eating and exercise habit. Absolutely a myth. This is a commonly held belief, both in our society as a whole and by people living even with type 2 diabetes. It's false and completely rooted in diabetes and weight stigma. Type 2 diabetes is a complex health condition. It has a wide variety of contributing factors, but first and foremost, it is a genetic condition. People with type 2 diabetes have a genetic predisposition to it, even if they don't know of anyone else in their family who has had it. So that being said, there are environmental factors that can influence how genes are implicated in our diabetes or expressed, like our activity level and what we eat. But unfortunately, however, we've got changes to our environment. We've got increased automation, less activity, easily accessible high caloric foods are everywhere around us, right? That's led to a lot of people's diabetes genes getting turned on and an increase in the number of people with diabetes. But this here absolutely is a myth. Next one on here, after you get a type 2 diabetes diagnosis, you should be able to reverse it by losing weight. There's currently no cure for type 2 diabetes. Saying we're reversing diabetes implies getting rid of it. It's this goal that's rooted in stigma and shame about living with diabetes. If someone got a cancer diagnosis, we would never tell them that they did it to themselves and they should just get rid of it without treatment. But people living with diabetes hear this all the time or hear things similar to this all the time. In some cases, type 2 diabetes can be put into remission if you have major changes to eating and exercise habits. But for most people, those changes needed to get to that remission are very unsustainable or unrealistic or too much to handle. So instead, it's way more productive to accept a diabetes diagnosis for what it is and focusing on living well with this condition that we have and preventing complications from diabetes in the future. And then finally here, weight management is all about willpower. Nothing else, just willpower. Just absolutely a myth as well. Weight loss is a complex process that involves so many factors: genetics, metabolism, hormone, lifestyle, medications, other healthcare diagnoses. While motivation can absolutely play a role in this, it's not the sole determinant of weight loss. It's really important to consider your overall lifestyle changes, like a balanced diet, regular physical activity, emotional well-being, right? And this is true for diabetes as well. Changing what you eat and how you move your body in ways that you can sustain long-term can really go a long way towards getting those blood sugars into your target ranges, whether or not you even lose any weight at all. But really making weight loss the primary focus of your diabetes care plan can be really counterproductive if maybe you're not losing the weight that you want to. And many people might have to take medication to get their blood sugars to target or in the range that you want, and that's okay too. You might be thinking, well, Erica, this is all wonderful and dandy, but I'm not a healthcare provider, so what can I even do about this? How can I actually make a difference here in this conversation? So glad you asked. There are so many things that we can all do as individuals to help reduce these stigmas. Now, this is challenging because weight bias especially is much more socially acceptable than other types of biases, but there are absolutely things that we all can be doing. First of all, it could just be some self-reflection, asking yourself, do I hold negative opinions about people with excess weight? Why do I hold these negative opinions? What do I do about them once I have these opinions? It could also be education on the complexity of weight and diabetes. So promoting good, accurate information about weight and diabetes. I know we like to use like the American Diabetes Association, the CDC, American Heart Association, Diabetes Food Hub. There's a destigmatize.org website that's pretty good, educating ourselves and others. And then also having the conversation. So not being afraid to talk about it with our community, our friends and family, just like we are here today. I'm hoping that this conversation lasts longer than just the time that we're all here today. And then also using first-person language. So first-person language is about recognizing that at the end of the day, everyone is still a person first and not defined by their diagnosis. So rather than saying, oh, they're a diabetic, saying they're just a person living with diabetes. Again, if someone is diagnosed with cancer, we don't say they're cancerous, right? They're just a person that's been diagnosed with diabetes and it's this condition, but it doesn't define who they are. You know, we are so much more than our diagnosis, really trying to avoid those derogatory or stigmatizing words like lazy, non-compliant, failure, unmotivated, things like that. Some other people like to think about this as strengths-based language, which is really focusing or emphasizing people's strengths that can empower people to take more control over their own health. So if you think about like glass half full versus glass half empty, we're thinking glass half full. We're focusing on their strengths and things that we can be doing. So some examples of that. What does person first language even look like? So on the left-hand side here, we've got some language with potentially negative connotations and some replacement ideas that we've come up with. So rather than saying non-compliant or non-adherent, just stating it for what it is. Maybe they take their medication about half the time, or they take insulin when they can afford it. Rather than saying they're non-compliant, looking at the bigger picture, is there a reason that they're not able to take their medications? And just stating in fact they take it when they can afford it. Even the word diabetic, right? How often do we hear this diabetic person or diabetic education or, oh, how long have you been a diabetic, right? But recognizing we're so much more than our diagnosis. We are a person living with diabetes. It's diabetes education, or how long have you been living with diabetes or had diabetes? And then on the flip side of that, if someone has not been diagnosed with diabetes, not saying that they're non-diabetic or quote unquote normal, right? You can, the normal word is one that we really don't like here, but rather just saying they're a person who just doesn't have or is living without diabetes. They're not normal, they just don't have diabetes. Using declined versus refused, like refusing medications versus declined medications. And then it's like I talked about, that strengths-based language, rather than saying words or phrases that threaten, like you are going to end up blind or on dialysis if you don't take care of this right now. Focusing on that strengths. So maybe saying more people are living long and healthy lives with diabetes. Let's work together to make a plan that will work for you. And so if you have any other ideas as we go through the rest of these couple slides here, feel free to throw those in the chat. Give us some other examples of what that might look like or what you have heard in your everyday life. Then some other strategies here to continue to reduce the stigma, utilizing a health-focused approach. It's a holistic approach to our health, recognizing that our health is not solely determined by our weight. We are so much more in our bodies than just our weight. And taking that when we think about our own health or the health of others, really taking that holistic approach and looking beyond just the number on the scale. Also advocating for larger health change. So things that have public impact, whether it's funding for more research on these stigmas that exist, or support public health initiatives that exist that promote early detection for diabetes or education around diabetes. Meeting with a diabetes educator if you've been diagnosed with diabetes. So that's the job that Caitlin was saying she has. She's a diabetes educator. If you've been diagnosed with diabetes, please go see a diabetes educator. They're awesome. Our whole team, Caitlin included, is really awesome about talking about the stigmas that exist, but also just really helping you manage your diabetes to the best that you can. So highly recommend, whether you're newly diagnosed with diabetes or you've been living with it for a long time and just want to get some more education, that you do some diabetes education. And then also evaluate your own biases, right? So we said, do we have these biases in our head that exist? So one example of this could be this implicit bias test that's on your screen here. They have a lot of different implicit bias tests on this website. They've got some for race and religion and sexuality and gender, but they also have a weight bias test on here too. So I would really highly encourage you all to do that and evaluate your own biases that maybe you didn't even know that you had. And then finally, we have our health at every size movement. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with health at every size, this is this growing idea that healthcare should be accessible to all people, no matter their size and no matter why they are that given size. It's really based on 5 different principles here, based on weight inclusivity, health enhancement, respectful care, eating for well-being, lots of life-enhancing movements. Really great movement that's been growing is this health at every size. So I'd encourage you even to read up on that and get some more information about this health at every size movement as well. Right. And with that, that is all that I have for you all. So we are going to open this up to just a discussion. Caitlin, if you are able to unmute yourself and turn your camera back on, if you've got other thoughts that maybe we didn't even touch on today, and then we'll see if there are any questions in the chat or in the Q&A as well.
I mean, I think that was great, Erica. That was a pretty thorough discussion. I mean, I will say in my work as a diabetes educator, I do see the impact that stigma and kind of that internalized stigma that people carry. I see the impact that it has on their health. I've heard stories of everything from, people just having a really difficult time with their visits with their doctor. Someone once told me she cries after every visit that she has with her doctor because they always talk about her weight, and that's, consistently a source of stress for her. To just folks having trouble coping with their diagnosis because that shame is so great and it can be really kind of paralyzing, I think, for people. When really, when you get a diabetes diagnosis, what's important is that you start to, actively manage it as soon as possible. And getting beyond that shame and stigma can be, kind of the first step towards that a lot of times. So yeah, really, really happy that we're having this discussion.
Great. I don't see any questions here in the chat, so I think we are all set. If you've got any questions or any thoughts for myself or for Caitlin, feel free to throw those in the chat. We do these webinars every month, so next month is all about gut health with our fun, amazing colleague Riley. That's on August 15th at the same time, 12 p.m. So I'd encourage you to join that one as we talk about all things gut health as well. So otherwise, thank you all for spending this wonderful 40 minutes or so here with us during your lunch hour. And we'll hang out here if anyone's got any other questions.
Yeah, and thank you for being a part of this conversation. And hopefully you can go forth and sort of change some of that stigma and make it easier for people living with diabetes.